For anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Gemma and I have recently bought a second-hand Lewitt combo table loom and I've been learning to weave. I've done 2 warps now, and so I thought for anybody else in the same boat as me who's very early on in the journey or just wants to see what someone else is doing, how they've gone, I thought I would share 5 things that I've learned about setting up the loom. Number 1, I've learned that you can wind a warp without using a warping board or without using a warping mill, but it's not easy. So I will link in the description using 2 upside down dining chairs to wind a warp. Because I had the chairs upside down, I had to really bend quite a long way to wrap them around the sort of far side of the legs. I've got a bad back, so it took a lot longer because I could only do just a little bit at a time, and then I got backache and had to stop. And I think ideally it's probably better when you're winding a warp not to stop and start too much, because I guess the tension might change a little bit. And you'd have to sort of pull it and wrap it to kind of keep it from unraveling. So it's probably better to try and do it in as quicker session as you can. I've wound another warp for the next project, and I visited a weaver and borrowed her warping board, and do you know what, it was so much easier. I've got the stuff to make a warping board, but I'm going to be moving probably in the next 6 months to a year, and it's going to be big. So I have borrowed some warping pegs that I'm going to try and see if that's any easier. But the other problem with the chairs is that the yarns kind of sag. I'll put another photo in here and you'll be able to see kind of where they sag. So they're not the same length when you then add them to the loom. So it does probably mean it makes it a bit more complicated, and you probably end up with a bit more loom waste than you normally would. So it can be done, but it's not as easy. Number 2, second thing I learnt, is that linen and wool, a blend, which is what I've got accidentally bought 3 kilograms of, it's not the best thread or yarn to warp with the first time, or the second time probably. So the linen doesn't have as much stretch, and it's really hairy. It's probably the sort of short fibres of the linen, might say, my friend told me. So it's more difficult to work with. I love the results. I mean, they are probably a bit itchy. I wouldn't want to wear them next to my skin, but I love the look of linen, so that's why I got it. But there's not much stretch, so it's harder to do the tension. So the first warp I did, the tension kind of went halfway through, and that was probably because I was winding the warp on with some of the handles up, which I didn't realise I wasn't supposed to do, but I still sometimes forget. But yeah, not the best idea. Number 3. So one of the things that I learned, I'm kind of glad I didn't know this before, so maybe I shouldn't be telling you, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because I'm all in the spirit of honesty, is that weaving is much harder than I thought it was going to be. And weaving on a table loom is probably a more difficult place to start. I've done a sari weaving course over a weekend, but you don't have to do any of the setting up of the loom. That was all done for you. So you just did the weaving bit, which is the kind of easiest bit in a way. So I think in hindsight, I would probably start with a rigid heddle loom, just to get used to sort of setting up something that's a little bit easier. And I think had I not invested so much into it, I might have put it to a side and not come back to it. Not because I didn't want to, but just because I would have got distracted by something else. But because I've invested so much time in researching weaving and redoing the loom, that wasn't an option. But I did get quite frustrated. But I also think one of the things that originally appealed to me about weaving is that not everyone's doing it. It is harder and it is more skilled than some other crafts that you can just pick up and put down. So that's appealing, and I think weavers are dedicated to their craft. It is a long process. I think it's about getting into that mindset that setting up the loom is part of the weaving process, and it's a skill basically. It's lots of skills. So yeah, but I hadn't realised it was going to be as hard as it is, and it is getting easier, and it's exciting when you kind of get going and you first produce a piece of cloth, but you have to really hang in there for a bit to start with, and it's probably also a lot easier to get somebody who is a seasoned weaver to do a bit of tuition with, maybe join a guild or see if you can do a class specifically in table loom weaving if that's what you've got, because I didn't do that. I tried to do it on my own, which did work ish. I asked an awful lot of questions, and since I have been to visit a seasoned weaver, and actually there's a lot of things in there that's starting to make more sense. I think I tend to always jump in at the deep end and struggle, and I think maybe that's just how I learn. But I think there are easier ways of doing it if that doesn't appeal to you. Number 4 is linked to number 3, and that is that setting up the loom, winding on the warp, well, doing the warp in the warping board, winding the warp onto your loom, threading the heddles, slaying the reed, tying it all on, testing it, undoing all the bits that are wrong, and doing it again takes a long time. I hadn't appreciated how long it was going to take, and obviously it took me a lot longer the first time I did it. It was quicker the second time, and you learn sort of tips and tricks as to how to do it. Also, the method that you use is really important. So I watched some videos on threading and slaying and stuff, and had a go at trying to adapt it to the loom that I've got. And my loom, the raddle is on the top of the castle, so it's much more difficult to follow some of the strategies that have it kind of at the front, which is what I was trying to do. So the second warp, my friend said, oh, you know, try Jane Stafford's, and she sent me a video, which I will link in the description. So for anybody that's got a raddle on the top, that's a really good method to follow, and it was so much easier. So I think a lot of weaving is finding the right way that works for you, but also the right way that works for your loom, and also accepting that it's going to take a while. And for me, you know, with my back issues, I just did a little bit at a time, but I think the problem with that is you forget where you've got to, and you're more likely to screw it up, which is probably what I did the second time. But I found a hack, or my friend told me a hack that was like, oh God, it's going to save me hours. So there are ways and means of making it a bit easier. Number 5, tension is key. I was quite worried when I was doing the first warp about whether all the yarns were going through the cross properly and not getting them out of order, and actually that's maybe not as important as tension. So with the tension, I didn't realise that you're supposed to make sure all the shafts are down or up, depending on what your loom does, when you wind on the warp, when you advance the warp. Otherwise, you're getting uneven tension, which is what I got the first time I did it, and then I had to cut off the first part of the project, re-tie it on. Also, tying it on using the surgeon's knots that you can then pull forward and tighten once you've put them all on. That's a lifesaver. It's, you know, or I should say it's a game changer, because it just means you don't have to untie it, tighten it up, tie it again. You just can pull it and stretch it, and yeah, that's really helpful. And I will link in a video where it sort of demonstrates that, because I don't think I filmed it when I was doing that. So yeah, my second attempt, the tension was much better, and I managed to get through the whole warp without any real tension issues. And I did try floating salvages for that one, and obviously you need to make sure the floating salvages tension is good. So those are the 5 things I've learned about setting up the loom. There's lots of others actually. I think it's a really steep learning curve with weaving, but you learn a lot really quickly. So I'll probably do some more of these videos about different topics. So if you've found that useful, you know, keep your eye out for some more. I think the more we new weavers share with each other, the better. I found that the tutorial videos were really useful, but when you had a problem or screwed something up, I don't think there's always, because they can't go through absolutely everything that might go wrong and do the tutorial, it's quite difficult to know what to do when that happens. I think also Anywhere you can find other weavers, and they are all over the place, you know, that's really helpful. So, you know, post your questions, post a picture, post your questions, help, you know, what's going on with this, especially if you haven't got a local guild. But yeah, if you've got a local guild or a weaving group, or set up your own weaving group, that's something I'd like to do eventually. But yeah, ask questions and don't suffer on your own. And maybe watch some of my other videos to see when I mess something up how I fixed it, because you know, if it's a mistake that can be made, I have probably made it. Okay, so I will see you in the next video.